The United States has often been called the graveyard of languages for its ability to rapidly assimilate immigrants and their subsequent generations into adopting English while losing their original ethnic language. Looking back historically, among third-generation individuals descended from the major European ethnic groups, the percentage who eventually only spoke English exceeds 90% for almost every single ethnic group. However, how does this historical pattern of language shift compared to today's contemporary immigrant groups, most of whom arrive from Asia and Latin America? Studies find that Asian groups lose their ethnic language at extremely fast rates, with 91% of Chinese, 97% of Japanese, 90% of Koreans, and 95% of Filipinos only speaking English by the third generation. In contrast, Latin American immigrants have shown an ability to slow, although not entirely resist, the process of English assimilation. By generation 2.5, 35% of Mexicans, 29% of Salvadorans and Guatemalans, and 13% of other Latin Americans still speak Spanish well. In contrast, the proportion of speaking the mother tongue very well in generation 2.5 does not exceed 6% for any other group. Yet research has found that Latin American immigrants too eventually succumb to rapid shifts toward English. Among fourth-generation Mexican Americans, the percentage who speak Spanish very well is just 5%. Among third-generation individuals, 78% of Cubans, 64% of Mexicans, and 51% of Dominicans only spoke English. As we see, while all immigrant groups succumb to shifts to English, different groups retain varying rates of language retention. It is now worth looking at what factors and features can account for these differences. One major factor that has been shown to have a noticeable impact on shifts to English is whether parents marry into their own ethnic or linguistic group. If the marriage crosses an ethnic boundary that also is associated with a different mother tongue, then the odds that the child will only speak English are increased by a factor that ranges from 2.6 to 6.4. In this regard, Latin Americans have higher rates of marrying within their own ethnic groups as well as with other Latin Americans. Since almost all these groups speak Spanish and thereby avoid crossing the linguistic marriage boundary, they may be able to avoid the sharp declines in ethnic language retention characteristic of other cross-ethnic marriages. Secondly, groups residing in cities with more homogeneous immigrant populations will switch to English at slower rates, since the possibility of communicating through their Old World mother tongue is much greater than in a city where the immigrant groups are from diverse sources and hence do not share a common language alternative to English. In cities with large Latin American and Spanish-speaking populations, they tend to make up the vast majority of immigrants, such as making up over 2/3 of the entire Miami immigrant community. In contrast, Asian immigrant groups often settle in areas with high number and variety of non-Asian immigrant groups, such as Los Angeles and New York City. Overall, all immigrants continue to follow the path of the historical European immigrants in rapidly adopting English. Thus, the United States seems to continue to cement its status as a graveyard of languages, and despite the massive influx of immigrants from all corners of the world in the past half-century, the status of English in the United States seems to be no less dominant than at any point in the nation's history.